But this didn't have to do this at all. And I'm deliberately going to go and talk about people in all kinds of parts of game development. I'm not just going to talk about programmers and designers, which I know a lot about. So let's start with a great executive I worked with. He was a VP. He was really nice. He was very direct with me. He could be very persuasive. I once joked with someone that he could tell me to go to hell and I would pack my bags and look forward to the trip. But he never did. And also, he never lied to me. To this day, I've never looked back and gone, oh, he lied to me about that. Even better, he didn't do this thing that a lot of people who've been in charge of me have tried doing, where they're talking about A and then immediately mention B. And be like, as if A caused B, and they want me to make that connection, but that is not the connection. He never did that. The only thing he ever tried to persuade me of is things that he really felt strongly about. And it's, by the way, it's nice working with an executive who's passionate. You sometimes see that disappear as you go up the chain, and some of it's understandable. They have other things to worry about, like market share and commercial franchise appeal and expansion of intellectual property rights. But he never did. He never lied to me. He was always great to work with, and he was just super enjoyable. In programmers, I do have one story to tell. I've worked with a great programmer. He was brilliant. He's probably the smartest person I've ever met. But his code was a joy to behold. And I'm saying this as a programmer. And I don't think I'm an awful programmer. I think I'm a good programmer. I don't think I'm a great programmer, but I'm pretty good and I'm pretty generalist. I mean, I've done all the different parts of a game engine that you need to write. And all the parts of a game. I've done UI, I've done animation, I've done assembly level timing support, I've made, OS abstraction libraries. I've done everything you ever need to do to make a game. So I know what I'm good at, know what I'm bad. I'm good at, know what I'm bad. This guy was amazing. His code was clever, but it was never overly complex, meaning it was simple wherever it could be. If it was a simple thing he was trying to do, it was simple. It was simple. Where it had to be complex, it was complex, but it was also beautiful. It was just also beautiful. It was just impressively coded, often in a way that didn't need any comments because it was just so elegant. You could tell what he was doing. Sometimes I'd look at it for pleasure. I would open Perforce, grab whatever he had checked in the day before, and just look at it, because I can imagine that this is how an author, a writer, might read great works of literature and understand it, or even view it at a better level than non-writers could, just in all of the command of the author of the English language. This guy's command of C++ was just masterful, and I would just look at it, and sometimes I would look at his code and I'm just like, I would never, ever in a million years write that code. Anyway, I've also worked with great designers, and so I tried to think of, because design is so vague, I tried to think of a system narrative level designers that I've worked with. So I worked with a great system designer once. He did very interesting and very thoughtful system mechanics. But his true strength was a complete and utter mastery of Excel. Yes, the spreadsheet. He could balance the most complex arrays of formula, from combat formulas so that it made sense what different skills did and how weapons and armor worked together, to item economy. He could figure out what loot should be dropped by what type of monsters. He could create tiers of things and then go on to tell level designers, here's how you should do loot for this type of creature of this tier, here are the items. It was gorgeous. And if you asked him a question, he could back it up. It was never, I thought that would be a good idea. It was, well, if you look here, this item is worth this much because it does this much damage relative to these items, you do this much damage. Lots of use of statistics, lots of use of stochastic modeling, because sometimes things had ranges or had randomness, and he would take that into account in his Excel spreadsheets. They were gorgeous. I worked with a narrative designer who was not just a good story author, which I know a lot of narrative designers come into the game industry and they're like, well, I didn't write a book and I didn't write a TV show, so I'm going to write this game story and that player will follow it. I don't want that. I want a great story author who also understands player agency. I love that they can make interesting characters, not just sarcastic ones. I'm going to bring that up again because that's my bugaboo. They can write amazing dialogue, and I'm saying that as someone who tried to write good dialogue and couldn't. This person's narrative skill was such that you wanted to keep playing. If you ever had that reaction when you're playing a game, you're like, I'm just gonna play for like another few minutes. I just want to see how this ends, and next thing you know, it's like 2 hours later, because you just kept playing until the arc finished, because it was just so wonderfully written. That's what this guy could do. For a level designer, I worked with a level designer once who was just, and I didn't realize at the time, it took me until later to realize that he was just an amazing level designer, because he could put together maps faster and more cleanly than anyone else. In other words, the map was good looking, but also when you played in it, the flow was right. There was good combat space and stuff. And he did this from very disjointed art pieces. And I would love to go back in time and apologize to him for providing the tool that, like, all the wall segments weren't always in the same place, and all the props that were, you couldn't say, show me all the trees, show me all the rocks. And he often did it with very vague design specs on what the level had to support. What was just amazing, he had this intuitive sense for space, combat space, visual space, as well as what areas could be compacted so the player wasn't running everywhere all the time. Just a great level designer. As for artists, I worked with a great concept artist once, just absolutely phenomenal. And everything you wanted in concept art, it was pretty, it was evocative. When you looked at it, you were like, I would like to be in this world that is being shown to me. And fun. There has to be a playful element. There has to be some reason I want to, excuse me. There has to be some reason I want to play a game that looks like this. And he could do all this, and it was very distinctively his. It was his art. I could just look at it and go, yeah, I know who drew this. Similarly, I worked with a lead artist whose art was incredibly thematic for the whole game being made. As opposed to, sometimes you work with an artist who has their own style, and that style is in every game they make. They can't alter it to be thematic for the game they're making. This lead artist could. And as a lead, he meant he could get the other artists to do the same thing. So the entire game's art gelled. The sprites looked like they belong with the props and the walls and the UI and the box and the manual. The whole thing just worked. Let's talk about audio for a second. I worked with a really good musician once. He would listen to and understand my very primitive non-musician descriptions. And then I would give him selected examples, and he understood. I didn't want him to copy those examples. Those were examples of the kind of music I liked based on the descriptions I told him. But from all of that, he would weave this tapestry of music, which I still listen to today. I still code to some of his music. It is that good. Similarly, I've worked with several great QA people. They were usually the leads. They played the game in a very smart way. They'd push on it. They would stress it. They would try to break it. And they would try to break it in lots of different ways, not just the way they thought was fun or the way they should be playing it. And they knew that this is what I wanted, and they were unafraid to report these failings. And that's important because I've worked with people. I worked with a producer once who yelled at a QA lead for finding a bug. And it was something like, I can't believe you found this. We're trying to ship. I can't believe you didn't find this weeks ago. Guess what? When it turned out the bug was fixed, turns out the bug had only been introduced a few days before. So, nice one, producer. Anyway, great QA people are rare, and when you find them, they're awesome. What's my point of all this? I tried to cover all the different parts of development. I hope if you ever make a video game that you get lucky and you meet people like these to make your games with, because it was an honor to work with all of them, and I hope they know that. And at times it was really humbling to work with them because I saw work being done that I knew I could never do. I saw code I could never write, dialogue that I would never have been able to write. I watched people throw themselves at a bug in QA and test it in a way that I'm like, I'm not sure I would ever have the patience or diligence to find. Now, if only all these people were at the same company at the same time. Anyway, those are some great developers, I mean. everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about game engines. I've had several people ask about whether I prefer making my own game engine or using Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about game engines. I've had several people ask about whether I prefer making my own game engine or using one of the off-the-shelf available ones. And almost always when they ask that, they're talking about Unity or Unreal. There are other ones, they're Game Salad and a couple more, but the two biggies right now are Unity and Unreal. So to answer that question, my question is pretty much a qualified, well, but at the end I'll give a definite, like, look, for all practical purposes, there's an answer to this. But as always, I want to tell stories. You have to remember that I started back in 1981, and for about the first 20 years of my career, there was no option here. This was not a choice. You made your own engine. There was really nothing available to buy.
Yep. Had to make your
I even remember saying in one of my videos, it was really hard in the 90s just convincing other programmers at Interplay to share.
Just like I said, Neverwinter Nights was made.
I wanted to write some code one
The
time
Witcher
and
was made in
then
Neverwinter Nights.
just share it with the other programmers. You don't have to worry about bake switching on different video cards. You don't have to worry about assembly language to get a millisecond.
RPG Maker.
Here it is. And a lot of
games that
programmers
started
wanted to do
RPG.
that, but there were some programmers like, nope, I only use my own code. They would literally not let anyone see their source and only give their code out as precompiled libraries. Whatever, to each their own. From 1981 to 2014, I only used engines that were made in-house at the company I was at, with one exception, and that was Vampire Bloodlines, which we made with Valve's Source engine that was used for Half-Life and Half-Life 2. Besides that game, every game I made the engine from scratch, from nothing. That's where Bard's Tale and Rags and Fallout and Arcanum and Temple and Wildstar, even South Park. South Park, we used an engine that had been made in-house at Obsidian for Dungeon Siege 3. They called it Onyx. It had a lot of generic components that we just used for South Park, even though that's a wildly different game. So, but since 2014, I've made 2 Unity games, Pillars of Eternity and Tyranny, and 1 Unreal game, The Outer Worlds. And now I guess The Outer Worlds 2 is being made. So I can talk about those particular engines and what I saw as the pros and cons, but I should also caveat that with, I went into both of those game engines. For Unity, I already knew C#, and for Unreal, I already knew C++. Those are the 2 languages that you use. For Unity, it's for doing scripts from hooks from the engine, and for Unreal, you actually get the source code, and it's in C++. So you can do your scripts in the visual scripting language.
You can make a tool set with language.
Your programmers will be diving into the engine itself, C++. So there's that caveat there. I already knew both of those languages. So to me, Unity and Unreal were pretty level, and I can compare them back to back. But let me start with saying, I'm going to say the advantages and disadvantages of using your own engine versus using an off-the-shelf one. Note that a lot of the pros for one of these is a con for the other one, so I'm not going to repeat those. I'll give the pros for them, and then any cons that are unique to them, that aren't just, oh, well, this other one, the pro for this one was this, so the the con for this one is not this. I'm not going to do that. So let me start with your own engines. What I love about making my own engine is you can have it do exactly what you want. And what this means is you don't end up with an over-engineered system that has hooks in it for doing a lot of things you don't want, that spends cycles, setting up data a certain way, even though you're not going to take advantage of it. Now, the off-the-shelf engines, some of them are pretty good about, saying what components you want and what you don't. I mean, when you start up Unity, it's like you gotta make a 2D game or a 3D game, you gotta make a side scroller. I mean, I get it, but you still end up with a lot of things you don't want that just hang around, eating cycles and memory. The other thing I love about making my own engine is you own the source code, like I own Arcanum and Temple source code, and you are very familiar with it. So towards the end of the game, when you are trying to optimize and debug, you know this code inside and out. And so you have a leg up because you literally know what this code is, how it was written, and what your intention was to do with it. Which gets me to the third thing I love about your own engines is you optimize it exactly where you want it to be optimized. If you know your game is going to heavily be dependent on lighting, especially dynamic lighting, you can optimize for that rather than end up with this generic lighting system that was designed to do static lighting and dynamic lighting and maybe no lighting whatsoever. No, you can optimize it for exactly what you need. Similarly, if you don't need multiplayer, you're not going to spend any time on network code. You can just you won't have written that. It won't be sitting there hanging around. It won't have been brought in and then excluded later when it gets compiled out. These are all really things I love about making my own engine. Plus, just personally, it's fun. I love making an engine. It lets you touch all the different parts of the game that you normally wouldn't touch. But there's a huge con with making your own engine, which should be obvious. You will need a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of people, because you are literally reinventing the wheel. And not just one wheel. You're reinventing a lot of wheels. And I don't think you're going to do as good a job on it. You may be really good at code, but do you really know all the GPU pipelines? Do you know pixel shaders? Do you know network cards? Do you know the OS interface for networking? Do you know the ins and outs of everything about the operating system you're writing for? How it allocates memory, how it handles timers and input? Do you know that for every version of the operating system you're making for? Do you know that for the other operating systems on the other platforms you're making for? Because you have to know all this as well as the people making the engines. You might on a few of these, you certainly won't on all of them. And you might even not know them as well as the people making the engine on any of them. So, good luck with it. So let's talk about game engines. What's the advantage of buying an off-the-shelf engine? A, it works immediately. I can't tell you how refreshing it was when we jumped into Pillars that we literally had something up and running. There was no prototyping phase. We literally had something up and running really fast. It was really cool. And because there's so much stuff available for free, artwork and stuff, you can throw together a prototype in literally no time and then go, okay, let's replace all this art later, but look, we've got a world you can run around in, we've got some dude running around, you can do things. It's also very easy to find people who already know these engines, and it's getting easier every single year. As Unity and Unreal basically start owning the market, it's easy to find programmers for either. Therefore, that translates into it's easy to hire people who know these engines, and that's awesome. By the way, conversely, for these people, they like that you're using this because it gets them experience in something that matters in an engine more than just at your company. If you have a game and you make your own engine for it, those programmers are getting experience in nothing but that, and it doesn't transfer to any other company. Now, you, the company, may go, this is great for employee retention, but new hires are going to look at that and go, do I really want to get stuck here? Do I really want to go to another company and go, I have, 15 years experience in Engine X, which nobody uses and nobody knows how it works. So the idea that you might be making a game in Unity and Unreal for your employees, that is a really good decision too. Also, because this engine comes with support, you get support from a company that's probably much bigger than yours, certainly in terms of programming staff, with tons of specialists in it. So you have these people who are at your beck and call. Effectively, you can report bugs to them and they will fix it. And often, like I mentioned, these people have a lot of specialists. So this engine code will have a lot of specialty code that you may not either have been able to make in-house at all, or you have had to hire a very expensive specialist, and it would take a long time. So we're talking time and money and people in great quantities. So having an engine just saves you on all that. However, the flip side of that is, when you do need support, good luck getting it. If you're a big company and you're doing a very popular, well-known game, and you've met personally with people from the company making the game engine, yeah, you might be able to get to the front of the queue on some bugs, but most of you find yourself waiting for point releases to see if that bug that you discovered that maybe your game is dependent on has been fixed. And if it hasn't, with Unity, good luck. You do not have the source code. With Unreal, okay, you can dive into the source code and spend your own time and money and resources fixing it. But then every time you get a new point release, you're going to have to fold that code. The other big problem with these is they take a cut of your revenue. Most of them have switched from you paying something up front to they get a percentage of the revenue stream from your game. Now, for smaller companies, they waive this or make it a smaller cut. But once you're making a fairly big game, expect to give some of your money to Unity or Epic because you're using their engine. That's just the way it is. If you roll your own, you don't have that. Now, here's my answer on which way I think you should go. In a perfect world where there was no budget, no schedule, no pressure, of course I would like to make my own engine. I like to roll my own. It just has all the advantages I want, none of the disadvantages. But notice that by saying with no budget and schedule and anything, I just erased all the disadvantages that could possibly exist. We don't live in a perfect world. So, unless you plan to make an engine that you reuse for decades, or for some reason, you're in an amazing situation for every time you have a new game idea, you can make a brand new engine that's specifically designed for that. I think you just eventually need to come to terms that you will be using Unity or Unreal or another off-the-shelf game engine at some point in your career. You're going to have to bite that bullet. Once you do, yes, there are those cons I mentioned, but now you have a much better understanding of this engine, what it can be used for, and your employees have really good skills in that engine. So I think that call that horses run, that dog is out the gate. I don't know whatever that phrase is. I pretty much think that the decision's been made for you, unless you're in an incredibly rare circumstance that would allow you to make your own engine. I think from now on, people are going to be making games in existing game engines. And it looks like Unity pretty much owns, if it's a 2D or a mobile game, it's Unity. If it's especially a bigger game, especially an outdoor game, it's like an open world, it's probably going to be Unreal. There are other ones out there too that might make more sense for a specific game you're making. But I think in this day and age, if you're thinking about making a game, it is in your best interest to look at the existing off-the-shelf games to see if there's a good match already before you go and reinvent the wheel and make your own game engine. So that's my thoughts on that. Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to ask a question or answer a question. From Jeremy Mason 9802 asks, do you think game development is harder or worse nowadays compared to, say, the 90s? Or is it better? Or the same? Here's how I'm going to answer that, because I think that is a very nuanced question that needs a nuanced answer. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you some things that I think are better. I'm going to tell you some things that I think are worse. I'm going to tell you some things that go either way, mainly because depending on you may think it's a better thing, you may think it's a worse thing, or you may not even care about that thing. So let me start with what I think is better. And also, I think it's funny that you said the 90s, since I started in 1981. There's a whole decade there, the 80s, where it was crazy, and factors into the first thing I'm going to say. So here are the ways I think the game industry is now better. It is now much, much, much easier to learn how to make games. There are YouTube tutorials explaining how to do it. There are multiple game engines available for free. There are classes online. There are classes at universities. There are classes in high schools. Actually, there's a class in a junior high school that I know about. So much easier. So much easier to learn how to do game development. It's not even funny. So those of you who you try to use that as an excuse, oh, it's so hard to do game development, you have no idea how hard it was. On the Atari 800, which is what I first learned on, there was almost nothing available. I had to learn BASIC from other books and then figure out what was different about Atari BASIC. I had to go through memory maps and technical schematics to figure out where interrupts were mapped to memory locations so I could poke them. Sometimes I didn't know what value to use, so I would just poke them with different values and saw what happened. That's how you did things in the 80s. Now it's not only easier to learn how to do it, it's a little easier, I think, to get started doing it. I'm not getting a job, I'll talk about that later, but just to get started, you can download a game engine, you can download free assets for it, and not just art assets. You can get scripts and code and, sounds. You could have a game up and running in minutes or hours, where in the 80s, you would have to spend months before you'd even begin to see the tiniest of game show up on your machine. So that's the first way I think things have gotten better. Second way I think things have gotten better is pay is better. I know a lot of people going, no, it's not, it still pays badly. It pays better than it did in the 80s and the 90s. Way better. I've already told the story, so I'm not going to repeat it, where when I tried to apply for a mortgage in 95, the mortgage dealer literally was in shock at how little I was being paid. Next, he said, compared to people who have master's degrees in computer science and are doing programming at companies within 2 blocks of where you work, you are dramatically underpaid and you qualify for no loan through any lender I represent. And I was like, so the pay's better now. Housing is worse, but base pay, even adjusted for inflation, is way better now. Related to that, hours are better. Many people worked many hours more than 8 in the 80s and 90s, and even into the early 2000s. Part of it was passion, part of it was necessity. There was just no way to get games finished without crunch. Management was... games were in their early form. People didn't understand the phases you needed to do. They didn't understand games as art. They didn't understand what things could be managed and what things needed to be just time boxed, and say, let's see how much we can get done in this amount of time. Things could get really bad. things weren't identified as being critical path or needing fallbacks in case their design or implementation failed. We've gotten better at that, and because of that, ours have gotten better. It also has helped that years ago, things like EA Spouse blogged about how bad crunch was at Electronic Arts and helped get the ball rolling on getting things better. So ours are better. Could they be better still? Yes, but they're way better than they were. And then finally, the fact that there are specialists now in the game industry helps so much. Back in the 80s and 90s, you had to be a jack of all trades. I had to know how to do graphics. Yes, a colorblind programmer had to learn how to do graphics. I had to know how to do sound. I had to know how to do... I had to write my own installers for the games because there was no generalized installer, so we had to write an installer for each game we wrote. You had to know how lots of different hardware, not just video hardware, CD-ROMs all worked differently. You had to learn how to do error handling. All of this, networking. Now there are specialists. There are people like, all I do is graphics. All I do is networking. It is so much better having people who know and study those things. So that's the 4 ways I think things have gotten better. So now let me tell you about a few ways I think things have gotten worse. This is all my opinion, but you asked. There are less original ideas floating around now. Now, let me put that in a bunch of conditionals. When we started in the 80s and 90s, well, especially in the 80s, there were very few video games. Almost no PC games. So almost anything you did was original. Whether it was a good idea or a bad idea, it was original. By the time you get into the 90s, and certainly starting in the 2000s, people would have ideas, and these had been done before. Often they didn't know. People didn't bother to play older games, so they had no idea they were reinventing the wheel. And sometimes that meant they went into the exact same pitfalls the game that had that idea had. Sometimes they knew about it, and they said, well, I have a new idea with a twist. So sometimes you saw an original idea, but it was an old idea with a little twist to it. Original ideas still occurred, but I remember even in the late 90s telling people I worked with in the video game business that I was seeing more original ideas in tabletop. I mean, that's where I got the ideas for Fate Points and Arcanum, Flaws in Outer Worlds. There were just a lot of really cool ideas going on in tabletop. Related to this is discovery. It is much, much, much harder now having your game be discovered by players. There are so many games coming out. Steam is overloaded. The App Store on iPhones is overloaded. Epic has a lot of games in it. If you still get ads online, I mean, I put up as many blockers as I can and pay for streaming services. I can't remember the last time I saw an ad. But getting people to even know your game's out is hard. It's why YouTube influencers and Twitch players and Let's Play and having streamers play your game is now a way to get people to know your game is even coming out. Even conventions are starting to die off. I mean, E3, it's hard to be discovered. And indies, I think, feel that pain harder than anyone because you may make a really good game. And by the way, they got a lot of original ideas going on there, but getting people to learn that your game is out and has this cool idea is really hard. Which gets me into marketing. I've said, and this is a thread and sub-thread on previous videos, some of the issues I've had with marketing in the past. Like demanding demos, demanding features. Well, marketing design really got in bed together in the last 10 or 15 years. I remember going to meetings and hearing terms. Now, I know I use a lot of terms, like I throw out RPG and MMO and all this, to the point where when I was dating an architect, he's like, I can't understand half of what you say about games. But I would go to game development meetings, and I'd hear people saying ARPPU, and COGs, and DAUs, and MAUs, and IPs, and I'm like, I knew what some of them were, but they were actually throwing these out as if they were relevant to game design. They are related to game design, but like these are people who wanted me to change my game design to support ARPPU, average revenue per paying user. COG, cost of goods. Do you really need that manual? DAU versus MAU, daily average user monthly average user. IAPs, in-app purchases, which you all know as microtransactions. What started back with that horse armor has grown into an entire industry financial support pillar. So I don't think this is a good thing. It is not supporting design for good design. It's supporting design to make money. So for the same reason I think player agency is good, but player addiction is not, this intrusion of marketing into game design is not a good thing. Will it make money? Yes, because many of you will spend money on things like this. I wish, and I've said this in many of my videos, I wish people would vote more with their wallet. If a game comes out that you don't like, and you can, if there's not a demo, watch one of the streamers play it. If you don't think you like it, don't play it, don't buy it. Certainly, I never advocate doing early purchase, because just wait for it to come out. It'll cost the same. So let me talk about some other things, though, that aren't better or worse. I could go either way on this. Getting a job. I've seen people argue that it was harder back then. I've seen people argue that it's harder now. Let me tell you my impression of what's going on. Back then, there were way fewer game jobs to be had. But there were also way fewer people going for them. So anything that made you stand out. Oh, you have a degree in programming? Oh, you've already made a game? Oh, you have written some software that's really appropriate to what the game we're making? Come on in. Now, you can learn game development much easier. That was one of my first points. However, you compete against a lot more people. So often when people tell me how to get a job, that's when I say, you should have a demo. Because other people will, and that will make them go to the top of the heap. Won't necessarily get them hired, but it will certainly get them considered before you if you don't have a demo. So basically back then there were fewer jobs to be had, and that's why it was hard to get a job. Now there are a lot more jobs, but there's a lot more people looking for it. I did an entire video on team size getting bigger. So I'm not going to repeat all of those, but let me just say that bigger teams, there are a lot of great things you get from bigger teams, and there's a lot of bad things you get from bigger teams. So this is going to be a taste choice for you. Do you care about how big teams have gotten? If you do, you may want to look for companies that may either make smaller scope games or go indie. And then finally, the third thing that's kind of related to that is much longer development time. I've made a game, my shortest game was Bard's Tale, which only took a few months. Temple only took 18, 20 months. But then I worked on WildStar, the MMO, for 6 years, and it didn't ship for another 3 years after I left. So there are some games that just take really long development. This can be a great thing. You can make bigger games with more features. It can be a bad thing too. You might burn out. There's more turnover. So you'll be working with different people, and maybe you'll like them and maybe you won't. But also, it puts a big gap in your resume. I went from not having a game since 2004 with Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines until 2014 with South Park The Stick of Truth. That's a 10-year gap in a 42-year development career. That 10-year gap is big, and I have to explain it as I lost 6 years at Carbine and then went to a new studio where a game was supposed to come out in 6 months and it took another 3 years. So longer development, pro or con, depending on how you look at it. So what would I say overall? Wow, I'm going on a long time. What would I say overall? Overall, I think things are better now than they were 20 or 30 years ago. But from what I've said, I think it's going to depend on you, what role you want in game development, and what you want to get out of it. You can certainly find a satisfying job at a big company. You will almost certainly be one of many, many, many people working. I've heard people say, well, I feel like a cog in a machine here. Okay, go indie. Oh, but then you might lose insurance or guaranteed employment, or it might be contractual. So the pro and con thing, it depends on what you're looking for. But let me tell you now, these days you have options. In the 80s, there were no options. You took what the industry offered or you went and did something else. And a lot of people I know went and did something else. I have a whole video too on why I was stubborn and didn't go do anything else. So anyway, I hope, Jeremy Mason, that answers your question on do I think game dev is better now or back then?
from using the reference to make my own. Good time, good time.